is the main difference that you've noticed in the youth of today as opposed to the youth of when you were growing up? Or just
When
not
you
necessarily
say
the main.
youth, do you want a particular age group or
No, just
high
like
school age, teenagers?
yeah, sure. Let's say like high schoolers. It doesn't have to be like the main difference, just like differences that you notice.
There are two or three really fundamental differences. One, in this area, and I grew up in this area. I've lived here since I was 4 years old. Most of the children came from blue-collar workers that worked for Northrop or Douglas or Rockwell, and were assembly line people, and they were just a hard-working mom and dad that just making ends meet, and you took your 2-week vacation during the summer and went camping or fishing or whatever, and the rest of the time you did your chores at home, you had a job to do there, there was no expectation you were going to get a car when you turned 16. You just had an obligation to family to do things, and so you did those things. Those things have changed a lot. The dynamics of that have changed a lot because of the socioeconomic differences in this area where we live right here now and then. Obviously, the vast majority of people now are college graduates who have expectations that children are going to go to East Coast colleges or UC system schools. They're going to be doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. Where before, if you graduated from high school, you would go get a job, and it was okay to work in a gas station or be a mechanic, or it was okay to do that. That dynamic has changed the world a lot. The expectation on most children is very, very different. Most kids don't grow up with take out the trash chores, do the dishes chores, mow the lawn chores. Most people in Manhattan Beach probably grow up with a gardener who comes once a week and does their lawns for them. They don't even know which end of the lawnmower to use. Now that's not a slam against kids, but it creates a different dynamic in what they do.
Do you think that the fact that kids are growing up like with the expectation to go to college and like they're gonna like work and like have their parents pay for all this stuff, like do you think that's sort of creating like a dependence on parents as opposed to like when you grew up and you kind of had to like make it your own?
I don't know if it creates a dependence on parents, but I think what it does is creates immaturity. It slows the maturation process. You know, when you're in high school, when I was in high school, and you had the prom coming up, I had a job to go out and make money in order to pay for the prom. I didn't go to my dad and say, "Dad, I need $100 or $200 or whatever it was to go to the prom." It was significantly less, but I had to go earn the money. That doesn't make me a holier than thou person. That's just a sign of the time. Nowadays, parents drop hundreds and hundreds of dollars on the prom and wouldn't even think twice about, doing it. I think that it creates a society of children that are slower to mature. And ergo, we have many 30-year-olds living at home. They do mature slower in that regard. People say that kids nowadays are a lot smarter. I don't think they're any smarter. I think that their IQs are probably the same. I think what you see is a lot more information is fed to them, so they have access to a lot more knowledge, and they can get it faster through technology. And I think that's an advantage for them learning-wise. But that's the biggest thing, I think, is the maturation process has really slowed down.
And I think like definitely like learning how to like deal with problems. Like
it is.
Definitely.
You are not very street savvy when you grow up with mom and dad paying for everything, covering everything. I'll give you another example. We're at a school right now, and if I got in trouble at school in a classroom, and the principal or the counselor or whoever was calling my parents called up and said, your son got in trouble in the classroom, My parents would have accepted what they said as being factual. And when I got home, I would have probably got in trouble again. That would have been the norm. Now, those very same parents in a community like this would immediately call the school and challenge the process. Did you give him all his rights? You didn't tell him that. What about this? What about... They're trying to defend the child instead of ever saying the child could have done anything wrong, which is really a strange assumption to think that children can't do anything wrong. They're not very wise. Of course they're going to make mistakes. You know, I think that we went hand in hand with that other process, and I don't know that that's good for kids. I think we're raising a generation of kids, unfortunately, that think that a lawyer can get them out of everything, and that's not true.
Yeah.
If you're wrong, you're wrong, and at some point you're going to answer for it.
Right. And so did you, straight out of high school, did you get a job? Is that what you did? Or did
I did get a job right after high school while I was going to school.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So I started working right away, and I actually worked 55 hours a week while I was going to school. But there was, if I wanted a car and money, I had to buy the car and pay for those things and go to school at the same time.
Were you still living with your parents at that point?
There was hundreds of thousands of young men that were doing the exact same thing. Post high school is an interesting thing. I happen to have a personal philosophy on the times changing. I think one of the worst things that ever happened in America was the draft was taken away. I'm not necessarily in favor of sending kids to war, because I'm not in favor of war. But I am in favor of service. I'm big on service. And I think that when that draft was taken away, it could have just been altered. Instead of saying you had to spend 2 years in the military, you had to spend 2 years in community service somewhere where all you are is going to get fed and housed and make some really small amount of money, but for 2 years you're going to give to organizations or, like Peace Corps or something similar to that. Because I think that would be really beneficial in that maturation process. I think that's something that's missing. When children, boys in particular, graduate from high school, people are going to go fight in wars. We have military that do stuff, but it's an all-volunteer army, of course, so there's no pressure on anybody. They can do whatever they're going to do, and it doesn't matter. I like that service thing. I think that's a really valuable tool in young men in particular maturing. I don't know how you implement it. I know that there'd be a lot of problems with it. There certainly would be a lot of people who didn't want their children to have to serve 2 years in Africa in the Peace Corps or anywhere else for that matter, in Pittsburgh in the Peace Corps. But I believe the benefits far outweigh the problems with it. I think we'd have a more mature group of kids going to school, and when they went back to college after they came back from that, I think they would be more directed and understand what they were doing. Maybe some wouldn't even go to college at that point. But the ones who did go would be more directed and head where they're going to head. Instead of getting out of college and now search around, flounder around for 5, 6, 8 years trying to figure out, what should I do? I'm not sure. And I don't have the answer. I'm just giving you my opinion.
So okay, so like you kind of grew up in a time like where, so like what decade would you have been in high school in?
I graduated from high school in 1966.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So you were kind of like in high school, you would have been, there wasn't a war going on while you were in high school, was
The Vietnam War started in the early 60s.
Okay.
So before I graduated from high school, we already had troops in Vietnam.
Okay. And so did you graduate like expecting to serve? Because
well, when you were 19 in those days, you signed up for the selective service. You had to, because it was a draft. So upon your 19th birthday, you just signed up for the draft. That was by law, you had to
Yeah.
do that. If you were a full-time student, 12 units or more, you had a 2S deferment, which meant you were a student. And you couldn't get drafted while you were a full-time student. If you dropped below 12 units at any point in time, then you became 1A, and then not only could you, but you were going to get drafted. And and when I got drafted, there was about 50,000 boys a month being drafted. So you over a course of 3 or 4 years, you can get quite a few guys in the military through that method. I went to Vietnam. It wasn't something that I look back on now and say, "Shoot, I'm glad I went there to experience that." I am glad I went because my brother, who was in college, as soon as he graduated, he was at UCLA, and as soon as he graduated, he got drafted. Because as soon as you graduated, you become 1A.
Yeah. So
he became 1A and he got drafted, and he didn't have to go to Vietnam because I was in Vietnam, so they wouldn't send my brother there while I was there. So he opted for that and went someplace else. So there was a benefit, and I came back alive. That's another benefit. A lot of people didn't.
Yeah. And so, like, do you find that your generation was a lot more patriotic than like the youth of today? Because I mean, I don't see a lot of examples of patriotism in our youth besides like kids like on the 4th of July. Like that's like obviously like still like a big in our generation. But I don't know. I feel like our like country like isn't. I have a picture of it being appreciated more, but that could just be being delusional.
I think my parents' generation, the World War II generation, what is referred to as the greatest generation, those people were more patriotic. Yeah. Kids my age that were being drafted at 19 years old, I was back east when Woodstock was taking place. I wanted to go to Woodstock. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. That's where I wanted to go. I was in the Army, though, so I didn't have much choice. So I wanted to go into Nam. But I would have rather have gone to Woodstock. Yeah. I don't think kids were exceptionally patriotic. I think that a lot of them spoke out very violently about the Vietnam War. There was a lot of protesting on all campuses. So I don't know if you could say that they were more patriotic. They were, by law, forced to do things. And I think that, again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The people who are being forced to do it might have thought of it as being a bad thing. But I think in the long run, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if our generation was any more patriotic than kids today are.
So I'll just go like one more question. So with like all like the technology that's like coming out and everything, like people like have said that like quality of life is like improving. Like, do you believe that like for people growing up today, like they have a higher quality of life than the time that you were being brought up?
They certainly have access to a lot more information that could directly affect the quality of their life. Yeah. Health habits, eating habits, things that you do every day. If you have a question about something you're going to eat, you can Google it right there on your iPad, and 5 minutes later know exactly whether it's good, bad, indifferent, know something about it. In my generation, you just knew what your parents told you at home, and they basically knew what their parents had told them. Nobody was coming from a very professional standpoint. So I think that there's some really big advantages. I'm on the internet every night looking at different things. Yeah. My wife and I look at the internet with things we eat, exercise we do, kinds of things that we're going to buy, purchases we're going to make, we can evaluate. I think your quality of life is definitely improved through technology, if you use that technology. Yeah. Or if you use the information if you're going to go eat whatever you want to eat anyway, it doesn't make any difference. Yeah. But at least you have access to that information. So I believe it does. I believe it does improve the quality of life.
All right. Well, thank you very much.